In an era of giants feared by entire nations, one man stood against collective fear. While crowds clamored to return to the slavery of Egypt, his voice echoed alone. "Let us go up and take possession of the land, for we will surely prevail against it." Who would have such extraordinary courage? His name was Caleb, a warrior whose faith defied the impossible. He saw beyond the fortified walls and the fearsome sons of Anak when others saw only certain defeat. For this boldness, he paid the price of waiting 45 years in the wilderness, witnessing the death of an entire unbelieving generation. But time, which bends the knees of the strongest, only strengthened his determination. At 85 years old, when many seek rest, Caleb demanded the right to conquer the land of giants. "Give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke. If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out as he promised." The story you are about to read is not just about the conquest of Hebron. It is a testimony of a man who fully followed the Lord and discovered that for those who have a different spirit, even the most fearsome giants become small when seen through the eyes of faith. After the dramatic escape from Egypt and the crossing of the Red Sea, the people of Israel camped in the wilderness of Paran. It was a crucial moment in their journey toward the Promised Land. In Numbers 13, 1-2, we read that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." This divine command marked the beginning of a mission that would forever change the life of a man named Caleb. Following God's instruction, Moses carefully selected 12 men, one representative from each tribe of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, as recorded in Numbers 13:6, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, was chosen. Among the selected men was also Hoshea, later called Joshua, the son of Nun from the tribe of Ephraim. While Joshua already held a special position as Moses' personal assistant, Caleb was merely a tribal leader with no particular distinction at that moment. The instructions given to the spies were clear and detailed. In Numbers 13, 17, 20, Moses commanded them, "Go up this way into the Negev, and then go up to the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many. Whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." This was a complete reconnaissance mission, evaluating the territory, the population, the fortifications, and the available resources. The 12 spies set out on their journey, traveling through the land of Canaan from south to north, from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath, as described in Numbers 13, 21-24, they passed through the Negev and reached Hebron, where the descendants of Anak, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai lived. This detail would be crucial for Caleb's future. The biblical narrative highlights that Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, indicating its antiquity and historical importance. Upon reaching the valley of Eshcol, the spies found remarkable evidence of the land's fertility. Numbers 13, 23-24 describes this. They cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, which 2 of them carried on a pole, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the children of Israel cut there. The name Eshcol means cluster and was given as a permanent memorial to the land's extraordinary fertility. The grapes were so abundant that a single cluster had to be carried by 2 men on a pole. Along with pomegranates and figs, these fruits confirmed God's promise of a land that flows with milk and honey. For 40 days, the spies carefully explored the promised territory, gathering information about everything they saw. We can imagine Caleb attentively observing not only the fortified cities and the size of their inhabitants, but also the fertile plains, the lush valleys, the mountains covered in vineyards and olive groves, and the abundant water sources. To him, every detail confirmed God's goodness and the value of his promise. Finally, the spies returned to the Israelite camp at Kadesh, ready to present their report to Moses, Aaron, and the entire congregation of Israel. As we read in Numbers 13:25-27, at the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite assembly at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." The spies presented the impressive fruits as tangible proof of the land's fertility. Initially, their report confirmed the divine description. It was truly a land flowing with milk and honey. However, the tone quickly changed. In Numbers 13:28-29, the spies continued their report, saying, "But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan." The description of fortified cities and warrior nations, especially the descendants of Anak, known for their giant stature, caused growing fear among the Israelites. The 10 spies emphasized the impossibility of conquest, creating an atmosphere of despair and defeat before any battle had even begun. In Numbers 13:31-33, they reinforced their fearful assessment. "We cannot attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." The fear of the 10 spies spread like wildfire, leading the people to doubt God's promise and sink into discouragement. Yet, amid the rising panic, one voice refused to be silenced. Caleb, with unwavering faith, would soon rise to challenge the fear and disbelief of the multitude. The contrast between this pessimistic account and the reality of the promised blessings could not have been greater. The same men who had seen the extraordinary fruits now could only perceive insurmountable obstacles. The crowd began to murmur and doubt the divine promise. Fear spread rapidly throughout the camp like an uncontrollable wildfire. It was at this critical moment that Caleb revealed his true nature. While the crowd was growing increasingly panicked, he rose with authority. As described in Numbers 13:30, "Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, 'We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it.'" With these bold words, Caleb stood against the majority opinion, demonstrating unwavering confidence, not in his own strength, but in God's promise and power. Imagine the scene. A single man trying to calm thousands of terrified people using nothing but the strength of his conviction and faith. Caleb did not deny the existence of giants or the strength of the fortified cities. He simply viewed them from the right perspective, as adversaries already defeated by the power of the God who had parted the Red Sea and sustained the people in the wilderness. However, his voice of reason and faith was quickly drowned out by the outcry of the people. In Numbers 14:1-4, the Bible records their extreme reaction. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." This open rebellion demonstrated how quickly the people had forgotten all the wonders God had performed on their behalf. Instead of trusting in the divine promise, they preferred to return to the slavery of Egypt. Fear had completely distorted their perception of reality and God's faithfulness. Faced with this alarming situation, Moses and Aaron fell face down before the entire assembly. It was then that Joshua joined Caleb in a passionate appeal. In Numbers 14:6-9, we read, "Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, 'The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them.' The act of tearing their clothes was a sign of deep mourning and distress. Caleb and Joshua were devastated by the people's lack of faith. Their second courageous speech demonstrated a radically different perspective. Where others saw only giants, they saw God's faithfulness. Where the majority saw danger and death, they saw victory and conquest. The phrase, "we will devour them," indicated that their enemies would be easily overcome because the Lord is with us. But this vision was not based on a simplistic assessment of the situation, but on absolute trust in divine promises. The people's reaction, however, was violent. According to Numbers 14-10, but the whole assembly talked about stoning them. The situation was so severe that Caleb and Joshua's lives were in imminent danger. The enraged crowd was about to kill the only two men who had remained faithful to the divine vision. A direct divine intervention was necessary to protect them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. This supernatural manifestation of God's presence immediately halted the attempted stoning. The God whom Caleb and Joshua had so passionately defended now personally defended them. This revelation of divine glory not only protected Caleb and Joshua, but also exposed God's profound indignation toward the people's unbelief. In Numbers 14:11-12, the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they." Divine patience had reached its limit. Despite all the miracles and signs they had witnessed, the people persisted in their rebellion and disbelief. God's proposal was clear. He would destroy that generation and start anew with Moses, creating a new nation from him, just as he had done with Abraham. Faced with this threat of total destruction, Moses interceded for the people in one of the most powerful prayers in the Bible. He appealed to God's reputation among the nations. If he destroyed his own people, the nations would say that the Lord had been unable to fulfill his promise. He also appealed to God's previously demonstrated mercy. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now. Numbers 14:19. In his grace, the Lord agreed to forgive the people, but imposed severe consequences for their rebellion. Numbers 14:20-23 records, "The Lord replied, 'I have forgiven them as you asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it.'" The divine judgment was clear and specific. None of the adults who had witnessed the signs in Egypt and the wilderness, yet still rejected God, would enter the promised land. In Numbers 29:30, God declares, "In this wilderness your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me." Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. The consequence would be 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, 1 year for each day of exploration. During this time, all adults over 20 years old who had murmured against the Lord would die in the wilderness without ever seeing the promised land. As stated in Numbers 14:33-34, your children will be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years and will suffer for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lie in the wilderness. For 40 days you explored the land, and each day will be accounted as a year. You will bear your iniquities for 40 years and will know my displeasure. This was one of the most severe demonstrations of divine judgment in Israel's history. An entire generation was condemned to wander the desert until they perished, never reaching the destination for which they had left Egypt. Their children, whom they feared would fall prey to their enemies, would be the only ones to enter the land. Amid this severe judgment, God made a remarkable exception. In Numbers 14:24, the Lord declared, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." This divine statement about Caleb's different spirit highlights his exceptional nature. He was not swayed by collective fear or widespread unbelief. His perspective was shaped by faith in God's promises, not by visible circumstances. The specific promise to Caleb was extraordinary. Not only would he enter the promised land, but he would also personally inherit the very territory he had explored, including Hebron, the land of the giant descendants of Anak, who had so greatly terrified the other spies. God would turn Israel's greatest symbol of fear into a trophy of Caleb's faith. As an immediate sign of the seriousness of divine judgment, the 10 spies who had brought the negative report died of a plague before the Lord, as recorded in Numbers 14:36-37. The men Moses had sent to explore the land, who returned and made the whole community grumble against him by spreading a bad report. These men who spread the bad report about the land were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord. Only Joshua and Caleb survived among all the spies. Thus began the long 40-year period of wandering in the wilderness, during which the entire unbelieving generation perished according to God's sentence. For Caleb, it would be a time of patient waiting, witnessing the fulfillment of divine judgment while anticipating the realization of the promise he had received. During those 40 years, Caleb must have seen many of his contemporaries die in the wilderness. He likely witnessed funerals almost daily, a constant reminder of the high cost of unbelief. Meanwhile, he himself was growing older, knowing that each passing day brought him closer to the fulfillment of God's promise. His faith never wavered throughout the decades of waiting, and his spirit remained steadfast in the conviction that God would keep his word. This first part of Caleb's story teaches us profound lessons about faith, courage, and perspective. In a world where the majority's opinion often prevails, Caleb demonstrates the importance of maintaining a perspective based on God's promises rather than visible circumstances or popular consensus. He shows that true courage does not mean denying the existence of giants in our lives, but rather seeing them through the right perspective, as adversaries already defeated by God's power. 45 years had passed since that fateful day when Caleb and the other spies had explored the promised land. An entire generation had perished in the wilderness, in accordance with divine judgment. Now, under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites had finally entered Canaan and conquered much of the territory. It was time to divide the land among the tribes. In Joshua 14:6-9, we see Caleb approaching Joshua in Gilgal to claim his inheritance. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me, "The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." This personal account from Caleb reveals several important aspects. First, he recalls the specific promise made by Moses based on the Lord's word. Second, he contrasts his own faithfulness with the unbelief of the other spies. Third, he emphasizes his perseverance in following the Lord, a phrase that characterizes Caleb's entire life. However, the most remarkable aspect is Caleb's physical condition after so many years. In Joshua 14:10-11, he declares, "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then." At 85 years old, Caleb retained the strength and vigor of a 40-year-old, an extraordinary blessing from God that testified to his faithfulness. While his contemporaries had perished in the wilderness, he had not only survived, but remained in full strength to complete the mission he had begun decades earlier. With this renewed strength and confidence, Caleb made a specific request to Joshua. In Joshua 14:12 he said, "Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." This request reveals Caleb's unwavering courage. He did not choose an easy or safe territory for his inheritance, but specifically the one that housed the fearsome descendants of Anak, the very giants who had terrified the other spies 45 years earlier. To any external observer, this choice might have seemed reckless or even suicidal. However, Caleb did not base his decisions on what seemed reasonable to human eyes. His confidence was firmly anchored in divine promises. The phrase, "Perhaps the Lord will be with me to drive them out, as the Lord said," demonstrates that his trust was not in his own military abilities, but in the presence and power of God. He did not deny the existence of the giants or the strength of the fortified cities. He simply viewed them from the correct perspective, as adversaries already defeated by divine power. Joshua's response was immediate and positive. In Joshua 14:13-15 we read, "Then Joshua blessed Caleb son of Jephunneh and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly." Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war. Hebron, previously known as Kiriath Arba, city of Arba, was named after Arba, described as the greatest man among the Anakites, likely indicating not only his physical stature, but also his importance as a patriarch of that feared people. Receiving this city as an inheritance was not just a material reward for Caleb, but a powerful symbol of how faith triumphs over fear. The very place that had once inspired terror in the hearts of the 10 spies would now become the inheritance of the man who had maintained a different perspective. However, receiving the promise was only the beginning. Caleb still had to effectively conquer the territory, driving out its powerful inhabitants. In Joshua 15:13-14, we find more details about this conquest. In accordance with the Lord's command to Joshua, Caleb son of Jephunneh was given a portion in Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron. Arba was the forefather of Anak. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. With these simple words, the Bible describes one of the most impressive military conquests in Israel's history. Caleb, an 85-year-old man, led his clan in expelling the three main Anakite leaders from Hebron, the same giants who had struck fear into the spies 45 years earlier. The narrative does not provide tactical details of the battle, but the outcome was unequivocal. The giants were defeated, and Caleb took possession of his inheritance. Not content with this victory, Caleb turned his attention to another nearby target. In Joshua 15:15-16 we read, "From there he marched against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath-Sepher. And Caleb said, 'I will give my daughter Achsah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath-Sepher.'" Debir, formerly called Kiriath-Sepher, meaning city of the book or city of the scribes, was another important center in the region. Caleb, demonstrating both strategic insight and inspiring leadership, offered a special incentive for its conquest. Whoever captured the city would receive his daughter Achsah as a wife, a significant honor given Caleb's status and wealth. The challenge was promptly accepted by a close relative, as described in Joshua 15:17. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it, so Caleb gave his daughter Achsah to him in marriage. Othniel, the son of Caleb's brother, conquered Debir and received Achsah as his reward. This would not be the last time Othniel demonstrated his courage and leadership. Years later, he would become Israel's first judge, delivering the people from the oppression of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. Judges 3:7-11. The story continues with an episode that reveals much about Achsah's personality and Caleb's generosity. In Joshua 15:18-19 we read, "One day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, 'What can I do for you?' She replied, 'Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water.' Indeed, so Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs." This brief account presents Achsah as a wise and practical woman. She recognized that the land they had received, while valuable, was dry and needed water sources to be truly productive. Her respectful approach to Caleb, "Do me a special favor," demonstrates both her filial respect and her confidence in her father's generous character. Caleb's response was equally revealing. Without hesitation or reluctance, he granted Achsah not just one water source, but the upper and lower springs, likely referring to springs located both in the highlands and lowlands of the property, ensuring complete irrigation. This gesture illustrates Caleb's generosity and his desire to see his daughter and son-in-law prosper in their new life together. The account of Hebron's conquest appears again in Judges 1:10, with additional information. Then the men of Judah attacked the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. This passage suggests that Hebron's conquest took place within the broader military campaign of the tribe of Judah, though under Caleb's specific leadership, as indicated in Joshua 15. The biblical narrative includes a detailed description of the territory allotted to the tribe of Judah, of which Caleb was a prominent member. Joshua 15:20-63 lists the cities and villages that comprised this inheritance, including Hebron and its surroundings, now under Caleb's control. Interestingly, Hebron would later have a special role in the final distribution of the land. In Joshua 21:10-12, we read, "To the descendants of Aaron, who were from the Kohathite clans of the Levites, because the first lot fell to them, they gave them Kiriath Arba," that is Hebron, with its surrounding pasture lands in the hill country of Judah. But the fields and villages around the city they gave to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his possession. This arrangement demonstrates both Caleb's generosity and the significance of Hebron in Israel's religious organization. The city itself was designated as one of the Levitical cities, specifically for the priests descended from Aaron, and also as one of the 6 cities of refuge where those accused of unintentional manslaughter could find protection. Rather than resisting this partial redistribution of his conquest, Caleb seemingly agreed to it voluntarily, retaining for himself the fields of the city and its villages, the agricultural lands and peripheral settlements surrounding Hebron. This willingness to share his conquest for the benefit of the nation as a whole reveals another aspect of Caleb's character. He was not solely focused on his personal inheritance, but on the collective well-being of Israel. His faith was not individualistic but communal, recognizing that divine blessings were meant to be shared for the good of all. The absence of any record of complaint or resistance from Caleb regarding this division of the land is significant. While other leaders in similar circumstances might have protested or demanded additional compensation, Caleb appears to have accepted this arrangement with the same grace and faith that characterized his entire life. He understood that his inheritance was not merely a personal reward, but part of God's greater plan for Israel. The name Caleb has been interpreted in various ways by biblical scholars. Some suggest it means wholehearted or like the heart, while others associate it with the Hebrew term for dog, symbolizing loyalty and faithfulness. Regardless of its precise etymology, the name has become synonymous with unwavering faith and exceptional courage in Judeo-Christian tradition. The consistency of Caleb's character over decades is truly remarkable. From the first time we encounter him as one of the 12 spies to his conquest of Hebron at 85 years old, we see the same faith, courage, and determination. In a world where the majority's opinion often prevails, Caleb maintained his unique perspective, one based on God's promises rather than visible circumstances or popular consensus. The phrase that best characterizes Caleb is repeated several times in the biblical narrative: "He wholly followed the Lord." This expression, in Hebrew, conveys complete devotion, without compromise or half measures. Caleb did not follow God only when it was convenient or popular. He persisted in his faithfulness, even when it meant standing virtually alone. In Numbers 14:24, God himself testifies, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it as an inheritance." This different spirit that defined Caleb set him apart from his contemporaries. While the majority saw only obstacles, he saw opportunities. While many focused on the giants, he focused on God's promises. While the crowd cried out to return to Egypt, he pressed forward with confidence toward the promised land. Caleb's ability to maintain faith while others doubted is a powerful lesson for all times. This quality is not innate, but developed through an intimate relationship with God and a constant meditation on his promises. Caleb's faith was neither blind nor irrational. It was grounded in his personal experience of witnessing God's mighty works in Egypt and the wilderness. Another extraordinary virtue demonstrated by Caleb was his patience in waiting 45 years for the fulfillment of God's promise. During this long period, he witnessed the death of an entire generation, including his leader Moses. Yet his faith never wavered, and his hope never diminished. In a world of instant gratification, this ability to patiently wait for God's timing is a rare and precious virtue. Perhaps the most inspiring aspect of Caleb's story is his willingness to face challenges even in old age. At 85, when many would seek comfort and security, he voluntarily chose the most difficult challenge: conquering the land of the giants. His declaration, "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me," was not merely a statement of physical vigor, but a testimony to God's sustaining power through decades of faithfulness. Caleb's legacy is also reflected in his positive influence on his family. His nephew, Othniel, inspired by his example, became a valiant leader who eventually served as Israel's first judge. His daughter, Achsah, displayed the same practical wisdom and initiative as her father. The qualities Caleb cultivated throughout his life were passed on to future generations, creating a lasting legacy of faith and courage. Finally, Caleb's life exemplifies the perfect balance between trusting in God and acting with determination. His faith was never passive or stagnant. It translated into concrete action. He did not expect God to do what he himself could accomplish. Instead, he acted with courage, confident that God was with him every step of the way. This balance between faith and works, between divine trust and human responsibility, serves as a model for all who desire to live an authentic life of faith. If this message has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our channel to receive more inspiring biblical stories like this one. Share this video with friends and family who need encouragement. Together, we can spread these precious biblical truths and strengthen the faith of many. Remember, just like Caleb, you too can have a different spirit, a spirit of faith and courage that sees beyond obstacles and focuses on God's promises. May the Lord bless your life as you continue to follow him wholeheartedly.